Welcome back to Nukleopatra, making a Dead or Alive album with me, Barry Stone. Thanks for joining us for episode 5, everyone. We are more than halfway through our Nukleopatra adventure. There's still lots to discuss, and what we're discussing is obviously making a Dead or Alive album. Nukleopatra is 30 years old, and I've been catching up with lots of the Dead or Alive family to hear their memories of not only Nukleopatra, but also of their time with Pete and Steve. As a super fan of the band myself, I've been on the edge of my seat listening to our guests, so I hope you're all enjoying listening as much as I am. In terms of recording the album, we've covered more than half the tracks. And last episode, I spoke a little bit about my friendship with the band and the laughs we'd have in the studio. The more I talk about this time, the more that comes back to me. And I remember it was during the recording of the album that I became aware of Pete's fascination with Vivienne Westwood, the designer. There was no day that Pete came to the studio not in a look. And I'm sure anyone listening wouldn't expect Pete to leave the house and not look like a complete star. Most days, I think the clothes he wore were indeed by Westwood. And I remember one particular outfit had a huge Marlene Dietrich print all over it. It may even have been a jacket. But it was around then that he shared with me his complete fascination with Marlene Dietrich. Her life, her career, her director Joseph von Sternberg, and he basically infected me with the same curiosity about the film star. Pete loved the stories about how Marlene would know exactly which spotlight and camera angles made her look the way she did. I remember he gave me a very thick book called Marlene Dietrich, Life and Legend by Stephen Bach, which I still have. A fascinating read and one that took me quite a while to get through. Pete, however, would devour books. He would eat books for breakfast, lunch and dinner, as Colin Farrell would say. He was so well read, and when he wasn't reading books, he loved flicking through the magazines. Fashion, glamour, celebrity gossip, all of them. And I remember he had subscriptions, so they'd land on his doorstep as soon as they were out. So we'd be deep in a conversation about Marlene, and Steve would say, "Are we making this album or what?" But back to the podcast, and like I said, we're more than halfway through the album now, but there are still a few tracks left to discuss, and they're big ones, including the album's title track, which I'll be chatting about later this episode. But first, we have another very special guest. Our guest this week photographed what some consider to be the definitive cover for Nukleopatra, and that's of course the black and white cover used on the Australian release. You'll no doubt recognise her name from the sleeve notes of Nukleopatra, Di Vidos. Di's images of Pete and Steve together were included on the original artwork when the album was first released in Japan, but her photographs of Pete were used throughout the Nukleopatra era, appearing on many of the sleeves and artwork for versions of the album released around the world. We heard in episode 1 from Lynn how Pete would return to using the same trusted people time and time again. Di was one of those trusted people, and in the inner circle. She'd been photographing Pete ever since their early trips to Japan, when Di was actually part of the management team. My chat with Di was a revelation, as I had no idea her history with the band went back as far as it did. We're talking sophisticated boom boom era here, guys. Di was there for so many big moments in the band's career. She started by telling me how she first became aware of Dead or Alive. So we're going back now to 1984.
I was working for Chris Morrison Organisation, which is a management company that looked after Thin Lizzy and Ultravox at the time. And I'd gone to a gig and I'd seen Dead or Alive. And I came back into the office the next morning and I was like, we have to get Dead or Alive. And it didn't even occur to me that they wouldn't be available.
Right.
And I remember Chris going, well, I don't know. We'll have to see if they're available, like if their management is up. Anyway, it was up. Chris came back. He initially went and met them and he came back into the office and he went, oh, if we're going to take them on, you're going to have to look after them. And I was like, woohoo, of course I will. So just going back a step, it was at the University of London. And Pete walked on stage. I was at the back of the room. It was only a small sort of, I don't know if you know what that venue's like, but it's not that big. And I just remember feeling impacted by his energy. I felt like his energy was so big that it actually sort of like threw me against the wall. It was, like I was so sort of like moved by it. Anyway, they came to the office, and because it's all about energy for me, and I could see Pete's big energy and why people would want to rush towards him. But I could also feel there was a part of him that wanted to hide. And so I didn't go towards him. I actually connected with Lynn because I could see that Lynn was a safe place for him. And I thought, in order for him to trust me, I'm going to have to be trustworthy to Lynn. And I think that was the right choice because we basically stayed friends. Even when I left the company, Pete would call me and ask for advice on certain things or like who to work with or whatever. The weird thing is I was like this buffer in between Pete and Chris because Chris had views on how the band should be managed, whereas I have a much more expansive view of creativity where I feel that you can trust and connect and like how you're trusting yourself will be the right choice. And so I would be the one that would go and fight Pete's cause, basically. And Chris didn't really want them to go to Japan. And I'd lived in Japan. And I just knew intuitively, I was like, this is going to be the place. They're going to absolutely frigging love him. Pete's going to love it. It's just going to be the right thing. And it proved to be the right thing. And then we were going to America, and Chris wanted them to do a live gig. Pete wanted to do, it was a magazine called Spin. And there was a guy over there, part of the management team, but American. And he was fighting and saying, no, they shouldn't do it, because they were doing playback or something. And anyway, I ended up having a big fight with Chris saying, no, they ought to do it. I feel like it's the right thing for them to do. And Chris was like, okay, they're going to do it. But I wasn't going to go with them. And so Pete, I sort of love Pete for this. So Pete would do this thing of like where he just refused to go and do stuff if I wasn't on tour with them. Like their first tour of America, he's like, well, I'm not going if Di's not on there. And Chris would be like, well, and would play his buff. But if, you know what Pete's like, he's incredibly stubborn and he will stick by it. And so it would get very close to the going. And it was always sort of like the 11th hour. And it was like all of a sudden I had to run home and pack my bag and I'd be on the tour sort of thing. But saying that, it was exhausting. It was exhausting for me because, I was having to basically be the bridge in that.
When they came to Chris on your recommendation, so from that point on, were you basically their day-to-day person? And you were just focused on Dead or Alive?
And that's a really great question because obviously Chris wanted me involved with other acts. And it became less and less with, like with working with Phil, with Mid, with Ultravox. And then at some point, Simon Fuller came in under the umbrella and I was supposed to be, sort of connected with Simon. And I talked Simon into managing a girl singer, and I put an ad, and that's how we found Kathy Dennis. That's a whole different other story.
Okay, yes. It can't be overestimated just how pivotal Di's role was in the band's success. She had a knack for knowing exactly who would work well with Pete. Di was instrumental in setting up meetings with creatives that Pete could work well with, many of which he would go on to have enduring relationships with throughout his career.
It was my job to go and find the people to put around them, basically. So what I ended up doing was put photographers around him where we didn't actually go through the record company. I'd just get the photographers just to shoot. And if basically Pete liked them, then they'd get presented to the record company. And I did that with Paul Cox, and I did that with even Mario Testino. I went and talked Mario into, God knows how, God bless him. I love Mario. I actually got Mario to shoot a totally unknown band as well. But I actually said to Mario, will you shoot? And he was like, yeah, fine, like whatever, like it's not a problem. It was always about energy for me. So that, Andy Airfix, who was the graphics guy, I had, all these phone calls. And when I heard Andy's voice and we got into a little bit of a conversation, he was supposed to be like fourth that I was going to go and check out. And I just ended up going and seeing him. And we ended up just being in his studio talking for like 2 hours, like he'd been to Tibet and meditated in the. I was like, no, he's definitely the man.
Right. So you had a
I don't
connection.
care. Yeah, but it was really important that it was about the energy of people. And I think that was part of like why it worked so well, was that Pete as an artist felt safe. I feel like I called it correctly, of who would feel safe. And in that safety, he could be the best version of himself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Once they trusted somebody, they were in the circle, and basically, obviously, Andy did so much work for them throughout, even up to Nukleopatra. So you were basically there from the Sophisticated Boom Boom tour, is that right?
Yeah, 84, I think.
Yeah, because also this other weird thing is that Martin Barter was mine and Julian's manager for many years when we were first doing Jules and Stone. So that's another weird connection, because obviously Martin was part of CMO as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I haven't asked him this, but I presume it was Martin that took Pete to the meeting with Pete Waterman when they first were approaching Stockhagen Waterman. The story goes that the band really had to convince the record company to use Stockhagen Waterman, and the record company were really anti using Pete Waterman. Do you have memories of that?
Absolutely. Basically, what it all came down to was trusting Pete's intuition, trusting what felt right. So going back to the thing in America, the spin party. So the American guy who Chris had brought on for that particular period was saying, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. In fact, when the band did the party, the queue was around 2 or 3 blocks. Like, it was massive. People couldn't even get in. It was like this crazy, people were hysterical. And it was such a hit. And I sort of felt a bit ticked off, because when we got back, Chris was like, and I'd had to argue the toss to get the band to do that, like to allow them to do that. And then, the American sort of contingency were all like, oh, it was amazing. And like, we've got all, and I was like, yeah, but that, you didn't actually want it.
And was this right bang in the middle of the Youthquake campaign?
After Spin Me came out.
Okay, yes, okay. Well, from my point of view, all I ever heard from Pete and Steve was the constant battles that they had with the label. They had to fight for everything. It was never a case that the label seemed to be on their side. It was almost like they were working against them.
Isn't that true of any artist, really, worth their salt? To be honest with you, I just can't think of any artist, really, unless they're a bit of a puppet, that's going to have an easy time. What I always found was everybody needs their ego filled, I suppose, for want of a better word. And I know it's not a very nice word, but, like, everyone's trying to justify their role. And because I had terrible boundaries around that, I actually believed that it didn't matter who did it, because I was always hiding in the wings. I was never, ever upfront about anything, because at the end of the day, it was about the success of something. It's not about like who's going to do shit. Really, because I do believe it's an energetic thing, and it really has nothing to do with any one energy. It's a whole thing that works.
As the band's day-to-day manager, Di would often be the go-between between the band and whoever they were working with, whether that be photographers, video directors, or TV producers. Di would often have to ruffle feathers and be the bad guy in order to protect the band.
I can't remember what TV show, it was up north anyway, and they kept wanting him to repeat whatever. And he was like, no, I'm only doing it 3 times. And so I went out to the director or whoever of this TV show and said, look, okay, so you've got 3 takes. So you're going to have to get it in 3 takes. And I had no qualms doing that, because I was never involved in the business of being liked. most people that work in, the music industry or the fashion industry, they're all there to be liked because they want to go back and work. Whereas I would just cut my nose off to spite my face. I don't care. Like, I'm like, whatever, It's funny because like years later, someone actually said, the director of this thing said, oh my God, we were absolutely terrified of her because she was only giving us 3 takes. But that's what Pete wanted. He wanted 3 takes, and he loved that. He absolutely loved that. He was testing the waters with that.
He wasn't one for doing it over and over. And I would be guilty of that in the studio, of getting artists to do it over and over. But with Pete, no, you really had to get it early on.
How did you get around that with him?
Well, I didn't. I learned quickly that it was just their way or the highway. And basically, I just did whatever they wanted. And if he wanted to sing it 2 times, 3 times, I just had to make sure my levels were good and it was on tape. With some of them, if there was something that I felt maybe could be better, you could probably come back to it in a week or 2, when the heat wasn't in the moment. Chances are he would give you another take. I'm getting shivers just thinking about you being at all these key moments. Were you on the set of the Spin Me video?
Of course.
Mind blown.
Of course. Absolutely. So the couple, I can't remember their name. You might remember who they were.
Yes, Vaughan and Anthea.
That's it. Oh my God, well done. So Pete liked them. He absolutely liked it. So if he liked them, he trusted them. She was incredibly quirky, and she handled him quite well. We had a couple of meetings and stuff.
It's such a simple video, but like you said before, his energy just shines through. And like you said, it knocks you against the wall. I think it had that effect on most people who saw that video. It's certainly me.
But how was it in the studio for you with Pete? How did it feel for you?
I guess I was such a fan. Thinking about it now, some part of my brain must have put that to one side and just got on with the job. It's only now I'm thinking, my God, it's so bizarre. The universe conspired to put me in a place where I was there to be able to help them with this album. It's mad, really. There's
so many weird, like Lynn and I have talked about it. So I met Paul Rutherford before I met, Dead or Alive. And so there's like these weird sort of like crossovers of the people in Liverpool. It's bizarre, basically, how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there must be a word for it, but I just keep saying the universe conspiring. But like I said, Martin managed us. He was also managing Mike and Tim.
That's right.
So all these interconnecting things. Yeah. If anybody knows that word I was looking for, please let me know. I'm kind of fascinated by how even now, after working with the band and having got to know them, I still got such a rush hearing Di talk about the Youthquake period. I felt like that 14-year-old fanboy all over again. It's amazing what effect the band and that album had on me. It was just so impactful. Discovering the band piece by piece, obviously before the internet, the only chance I had of seeing Pete and the band, apart from the odd telly appearance they might have had, was mainly in magazines. I would scour all the music magazines to find out anything I could about them. And then every new image I'd discover, I'd get more drawn in. It all looked so visually exciting. From the Peter Brown photos, the Mario Testino shoot, the styling, the Dean Bright clothes, the John Galliano clothes, Andy's artwork, just everything about it. I didn't give it a second thought back then, but obviously all these amazing images we were seeing involved a huge team of incredibly talented people, and Di played such a big part in connecting all these creatives, and thank God for her. Those of you who've read the Paul Cox book will have read Paul talk about just how prepared Lynn and Pete always were ahead of the photo sessions with him. They did so much work before they even got to Paul's studio, so they were constantly thinking up these ideas for all the photos we as fans would devour, not even thinking about the amount of work that went into each shot. Going back to this impact though that the band had on 14-year-old me, I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. It's something about those formative years and how the passion you have for the music that you connect with during those years leaves such a lasting impression. One I think just never leaves you. Much more from Di later this episode, but back to recording the album now and we are going to talk about the title track of this album, which is the completely unique, once heard, never forgotten, Dead or Alive banger, Nukleopatra. Apart from the new Rebel Rebel lyrics, this song is the only song on the album that is 100% from this era. That is, it's not come from a previous project. Nukleopatra was written at the time and I think represents what Dead or Alive stand for in 1994. So in my diary on the 23rd of June 1994, I've written the word Cleopatra. Unfortunately, it says nothing else, so I'm not sure what we did with the track that day. But that's the first mention of it I can find. It doesn't crop up again until August 3rd, when I've written Nukleopatra, spelt as in nuclear explosion and Patra. The title is an amazing play on so many things. Nuclear explosion, Leo, Pete's birth sign, Patra as in Peter, and Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen. We've already discussed the original tiny seed of an idea which led to this song, and the fact it came from lyrics Pete wrote to add to the band's version of Rebel Rebel. These lyrics originated from lines Pete had in the outro to Bowie's song, and had lines about the King of Japan sending a telegram and somebody looking like a woman when they were obviously a man, long black hair and a 10-inch waist, boys crashing motorbikes all over the place, all really vivid imagery. So my recollection is that Steve took home the bones of a very basic instrumental, really generic 90s dance fodder for Pete to flesh out a story to go with the unused lyrics from Rebel. And boy, what a story he came back with. Pete had created a whole new situation which somehow involved visiting some kind of fortune teller who told him who he used to be in a previous life, and who he used to be was a queen called Nukleopatra. A He-Man body with an angel face, king of the she-male race. I mean, what a completely original concept idea for a song. So unique, and it gives what would otherwise be quite a generic instrumental a real authenticity, personality, whatever you want to call it. I think it's a really strong piece of writing from Pete, which I'm sure Steve also contributed to. The first time Pete sang it down to me, I remember thinking, where's the chorus? But after I recorded Steve spelling out the letters of Nukleopatra and put it through a vocoder, this became the chorus, and it was the exact right thing the song needed. I remember Pete bringing in a recording of Madonna's Vogue from the Girly Show tour, and he really wanted me to find finger symbols like the ones on there. This was one of those situations where Pete would get completely excited and giddy about what to me was something as simple as a finger symbol. But I think it was more to do with the fact that he'd had an idea, he's heard something working in his head, and when you could manifest that into reality, he was just so grateful and excited that this idea had actually worked. We built the track up and up, so many layers. Just when I thought we were finished, Steve would have another idea and the track just became the monster it is. They were both really into this one. I could tell they were invested and particularly fired up with ideas for the production. I absolutely love it. It's bombastic and it is the standout track from the album and became such a highlight of the shows they did to promote the album. Our guest last episode, Dean Bright, was on stage performing this track night after night and feeling the impact it had on the many crowds the band played to. When we chatted, Dean had plenty to say about this one and his memories of performing it with the band. One of the first messages you sent me back was when you said, when you hear the word Nukleopatra, it gives you shivers and flashbacks. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's just that kind of pre-performance nerves that word reminds me of, because often Nukleopatra was the first song of the set. So you come out like, boom, really sock it to the audience, most of whom probably not heard that song before, and it's an aggressive, hard sound. And also because the song is so hard and driven and aggressive in its sound, there's a kind of undercurrent of a message in the lyrics as well. It's just that all of that comes back.
The song explores a subject matter that not many talked about back then. It was very ahead of its time. And Pete obviously played with gender roles throughout his career. So you were standing on stage performing the song with Pete and also yourself challenging gender norms. What did the song mean to you?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of got it. I got the song. I didn't think of myself as transsexual or representing a woman at all. You know, it was drag and dress up for me. And I can't speak for Pete, but I don't think he ever particularly considered himself to be transsexual. He did like to play with the mixed message visually.
Yeah.
The lyrics, I thought, of that song were really witty, and the rhymes are devastating. The felt boots up to my thighs and black mascara all around my eyes. Just the rhymes are really fun.
I mean, I didn't think much about it when he came in with all these lyrics. To me, it was just a song that they were utilizing this verse that Pete had written for Rebel Rebel that David Bowie didn't approve.
Oh, yeah.
And he just basically, he was recycling something and actually making something even better out of it. Yeah. But yeah, the lyrics are amazing, and not man, not woman, not a boy or girl, a brand new species. It's amazing.
King of the she-male world.
Yeah.
Which is quite a statement.
Yeah.
And because Pete did present a feminine-looking man, king of the she-male world, I took that with humour, but it can be looked at as a strong statement of his intent.
So the next track we recorded was another cover version, and again, the original, like Rebel Rebel, was a pop rock classic from the 70s. This time we were covering Blondie's Picture This.
If you can picture this, a day in December. Picture this, freezing cold weather. You got frost on your lids and you'd be on the skids if it weren't for your job.
It's August 94 and Steve rocks up one day to tell me we're doing this one. I knew this song really well because as a kid, Blondie's Parallel Lines album was one of the first albums I owned. I immediately got stuck in recreating the Blondie backing track, keeping it pretty true to the original at first, which is how I usually approach covers. I start off by replicating as close to the original as I can, so all the parts are there, and then once it's sounding right, it can be deconstructed and we can decide which elements to keep and what it might need to bring it up to date and make it sound contemporary. The original has a lot of guitar work which we really needed a guitar player to do, and at the time Craig Hardy was an assistant in the studio who we knew could play guitar, so we called on Craig to help us out with the first guitar parts we laid down. Later we had Neil X from Zig Zig Sputnik come in and add more guitars to it. I had great fun messing about with the arrangement on this one, and I'm pretty sure the structure that you hear on the album is the way we recorded it and not just edited up as a 12-inch afterwards. So it was nice to be able to create a bit of a vibe and have it build and build into the song, and then to have that extended outro with all the repeated vocal samples. This is what I love doing. Apart from arranging backing vocals, doing an arrangement like this is one of my favourite parts of the job. Pete sounded amazing on this one, as does Tracy Ackerman. As far as I can remember, this all came together really easily. I know Pete and Lynn did end up meeting Debbie Harry, and I asked Lynn if the band's cover had been mentioned, but the meeting was brief and Lynn doesn't think it came up. But she did say Debbie was lovely. The last track I'm going to talk about this episode is one I know absolutely nothing about. But I know a man who does. This is Getting It On. So we've spoken already about the family environment at PWL, and at the time we recorded Nukleopatra, the company was going through lots of changes. Some familiar faces had left, but there were new people arriving and joining the team all the time. I remember all the studio staff were being encouraged by Pete Waterman to be creative and to use the studio whenever they could, and to work together with each other to help the company be successful. So a lot of the assistant engineers were teaming up together and creating partnerships to do remixes. This is how Julian and I eventually formed Jules and Stone. But there were other teams in the building as well. Les Sharma and Chris McDonnell were doing lots of remixes under the name Safe Hands, and they did a remix of Rebel Rebel, which I know a lot of you are fans of. Another team that was formed around this time was made up of assistants Jason Barron and Martin Neary. Jason and Martin went by the name The Juices. Steve, who by now has been coming in and out of the building for most of that year, knows who everyone in the building is and what they're up to. He really was a social butterfly, was Steve, and this is how the Juices came to work on Getting It On. One half of the Juices, Jason Barron, is sadly no longer with us. Jason was one of the original tape-ops at PWL when I started back in '89, but in or around '94 he teamed up with Martin Neary. And Martin and I have been messaging on socials as I wanted to get the story on how this track came about, because it's one that I didn't work on. So Martin has sent a little note which I'm going to read out for you now. I used to enjoy chatting to Steve. He'd always pop into the bunker. He'd heard our Juice track Blow Your Mind that was released on Graham Gold's label Peach, and asked if we wanted to do a remix for Dead or Alive. He gave us the vocals to Unhappy Birthday, but hadn't mentioned it to Pete. We did the remix and handed it to Steve, and then I got a call from the studio asking to come in early as Pete Burns wanted to see us. I was scared, to be honest. I thought he didn't like what we'd done and we were in for a bollocking. Anyway, turned out he liked what we'd done and wanted to do new vocals and add it to the album as a new track. We got to record Pete and produce a track for the album. They were good times. So that's kind of the story of Getting It On. What I didn't manage to get from Martin was an answer to why Pete didn't sing anything new over the backing track. My best guess is Pete planned to sing something new over the Deuces backing track, but when it came to it, either he didn't come up with anything he felt was right, or he just didn't come up with anything full stop. So they left it as it was. And we have now covered every track on the album bar one. It's one of my favourites, and I know plenty of you love it too. I am of course talking about Sex Drive, which we're going to cover in a future episode, and I've been digging and managed to find out lots about this track, which for me has all been brand new information, so stay tuned for that. Back to my chat with Di now, and before we chat to her about her photography work with the band, I wanted to find out what Di's favourite era of being with Dead or Alive was. She was there on the set of the Spin Me video. There's a photo of her sitting with Pete on the set of the My Heart Goes Bang video. She was there for so many key moments. I asked her which was her favourite. She also shares how things were after the huge success of Spin Me and Youthquake around the world, when the band were in demand, and her thoughts on how Pete handled this level of fame.
The first time going to Japan, that was incredibly exciting, because like I'd lived there. I wanted to show them. I was excited. And, you know, we were there at the same time, that first tour, we were there at the same time as Michael Jackson. And on one of the days, we actually outsold Michael Jackson. So, I mean, that's crazy. But we had such a, honestly, we laughed so much. We had such a laugh. And, you know, we were basically whisked and taken to the Michael Jackson show and put in like this little VIP sort of section. And he came on the crane right up to us so we could, you know, literally touch him. It was fun. I loved being with the band. Like, they were a lot of fun.
Obviously, we heard about this success that they had in Japan, and these, they were absolutely adored. And I was talking to Tracy Ackerman about one of the tours and how the fans would just go crazy and they would chase the coaches, but they'd be very respectful. They probably wouldn't know what to do if the coach stopped.
Yeah.
They would just cry, she said.
Yes, no, absolutely. And like they would just go hysterical, just stand there shaking. But I remember when we went to Italy, it was Bari, I think, and we were in a small sort of like van of some description. And the fans went crazy. Like they were literally shaking this. I mean, I was actually scared. Like, I don't usually get scared, but I was scared. I was like, I feel like my life is threatened here. It did get a bit crazy. And I feel, I don't know, I'm just intuiting on this, but I feel like he almost wanted it to slow down. Like it felt a little bit too much, because he was asked to support Madonna in America, like there was so much stuff coming towards him. And by then I had left the company. So he was sort of left, God bless all of them that worked in there, but they weren't holding the same energy that I was holding. Definitely not.
Di left the Chris Morrison organisation at the end of 1987, but she continued to remain close with the band, offering advice and suggestions for people to work with, even up to the Nukleopatra era, when she recommended Xana for the Rebel Rebel video. It was during her trips to Japan with the band that she first picked up a camera, and she found the photographers that she'd previously worked with to be really encouraging. Di shared the story of how she first started taking photos of Dead or Alive.
It was Pete, actually, that said, why don't you get a camera and take photos? So when we did the tour, that was the first time I'd picked up a camera. And I'd taken photographs, Pete walking through Harajuku, taking photographs. And I just thought they were all shit. I went in and got them developed and whatever. It was at Paul Cox's studio, actually. He's like, let's have a look. And I was like, they're all shit. And he's like, actually, they're not. And I said, well, that one looks a little bit overexposed. That one looks a little. And he's like, yeah, but that's just a technical thing. He was like, you can't teach someone an eye, and you've obviously got an eye. Like, these are really great. Like, if you cropped it in a bit tighter there or whatever. So he was very generous. To be honest with you, Barry, I've always found that, like, even when I started to, do my photography, people at one of the biggest labs in London, CETA, were incredibly supportive. And one of the reasons, because I actually asked them, I was like, why are you printing my book for nothing? Why are you, basically doing this for nothing? And they said, because we get a lot of photographers coming in here, all the big I am. And you walked in and went, I know absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And it was just so refreshing that you were just basically really honest and, and it's like, why wouldn't we do that for you? And I think in a way why I got on with Pete was because of the same stuff. I would reveal myself, and he always thought that was incredibly funny. But I think he actually just really liked that honesty because he trusted it. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to hide anything about me. It's like, no, I'm really fucked there, or, whatever. And I think he trusted that. Every artist has to feel there's going to be someone who's going to tell them the truth, even if it means, and look, we fell out. There were times where Pete wouldn't speak to me.
Yeah.
He just wouldn't take a phone call. But it might have even been because I'd gone off working for someone else. I was like working on living in a box or something, and so he was pissed off. I don't know, who knows.
Right. But these little episodes would blow over.
Yeah, and they always would, because like I'd never slag him off and I never stopped loving him. And I think that he just knew that, intuitively, he just knew that. And so we stayed connected, I'd go and sometimes house sit while they went off somewhere or whatever. And that's a big trust thing, to allow someone into your home just to wander around your home while you're not there. Being able to point a camera at him, the fact that there's, photos there of him in Queensway. We'd gone, I can't remember why we were in Queensway. We're just sitting in a cafe and I could just pick my camera up, point it at him. He was always just very allowing. And that's because he trusted me. I'd never print anything or show anything that he didn't agree to. So the photos I've done of Pete are basically just, they're all on film. So there's no retouching or any of that. And Lynn was saying Pete always loved that, you would shoot him and like, with no retouching, and he always looked great. And because I loved him, I honestly did. And I suppose him having trust, I think there's nothing better than someone trusting you. And so if someone trusts me, then I'm committed to giving the best outcome.
And so can you remember specifically with the Nukleopatra shots, was there anything different about those? Were you given any guidance, or was it just business as usual?
No, absolutely no guidance at all. They were very intuitive and, off the cuff sort of thing. Absolutely nothing about them that was Pete sort of like wanting to direct or whatever. He might make a suggestion on shoot, but he trusted. There was trust there.
It looks from the photos I've seen, it might have been a few different occasions. How many would you reckon you did around this time?
I have no idea, Barry. Oh my God. Like seriously, I have no idea. I'm like the worst photographer in the world in relation to, I'm like, here, once I've taken a photo, it's gone for me. And so I basically just gave Steve my rolls of film, or, the guy who used to do my film, I'm sure like he's still got rolls somewhere, because he packed up. I wasn't very together in terms of this could be archived, or I was always very respectful. And it's quite interesting, some of those photos you showed me, I was like, oh, I would never had chosen that one. But, because they had all the pictures, they were putting ones forward that I was like, oh, that's really interesting that Pete allowed that one to go through. Like, I'm much more critical and judgmental. And I think in a way that was the other part of him trusting me. Like, I was really tight on like what he would look like or the lighting. I suppose him coming to CMO and me being part of that journey was, I took his crazy whatever, and because I do have a very sort of like commercial aesthetic, even though, there might be some story or it'll have some symbolism in there that's sort of like secretive or whatever. It always has like quite a commercial aesthetic to it. It was very easy for that success, to be honest with you, because it made him very palpable to the general public.
And you said one of the sessions happened in a cafe in Queensway. Can you remember where some of the others might have taken place?
Oh, gosh. Rooftop off Portobello Road. I don't even know why I suggested going out on the roof, but we did.
They look great.
And then, took him into the toilet, handcuffed him to the cistern. He was up for it. Like, he didn't care. I mean, like, that's the thing. Once I've got a camera in front of my face, I get very sort of like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And he liked it. Having that commerciality was part of the sort of like success thing, because it made it all, look prettier, I suppose. Yeah. But saying that, I love all the old stuff that I had nothing to do with, because it's the journey, it's the evolution, it's part of like who they are.
Di took some amazing photographs of Pete during this Nukleopatra era, and I think the trust factor she mentions really shines through in all these images. There have been so many looks over the years, and that's one thing about Dead or Alive that's appealing to so many. They never really stayed static. It's quite annoying, and I'm sure most of you listening will agree, when Dead or Alive get labelled as a one-hit wonder, when there's such a vast catalogue to discover, with quite a few hits in there actually. But it's the variety that I think is really impressive. Pete never wanted to stay still, either in sound or vision, and I know there are quite a lot of new fans discovering the band all the time, and they might come in at the Nukleopatra era, they might come in at the Youthquake era, but I feel really happy for them because they have so much to discover when they start exploring. But Di's images capture Pete at a particular moment when both the music and visuals came together so brilliantly. In the last part of our chat, Di reflects on her working relationship with Pete, what a true one-off he was, and just what he meant to her.
I loved Pete. I really did. I absolutely loved him. I loved working with him. I felt so seen. and so appreciated and respected, actually. I mean, like, that's the crazy thing. I really did. I felt very respected by him. The thing with Pete is he's incredibly clever. He's incredibly smart. He's incredibly intuitive. He can see straight through bullshit. Like, there's no two ways about that. He could definitely see straight through that. And funny. Like, really, really funny. Like, I don't think I've laughed as much. But like, he was funny. I feel like, dare I even say this? I feel like they could have gone on and done so much more. Like, seriously.
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, I think it's really sad that they're not here to enjoy this, 30 years. I mean, that's just Nukleopatra. I mean, there's all the other albums before that, and a few after. But yeah, it's such a shame that they've left such a legacy of amazing music and visuals.
It's funny, actually, because when I went to Liverpool, my daughter got married a couple of years ago. A lot of the young kids were sort of like impressed that I'd worked with Dead or Alive, and obviously Lynn was there as well. And they were sort of like, and I just thought it's really interesting how there's there's a comeback basically for it. Because he really was the first of his kind in a, he was so frigging interesting just in his take, so ahead of his time. The boy was always ahead of his time on everything, on every single issue. I wished he was around now because I'd love to have some conversations on all sorts of stuff that's going on right now. I loved the juxtaposition. I loved that, he could look incredibly beautiful, but there was that sort of like strength, almost warrior, almost, tribal energy about him that I've never come across. Seriously, I haven't. And I've photographed quite a few people, and I've never really come across that energy since. The energy of Pete, it was unique. I know they say he was unique, but he really was unique. I actually feel incredibly blessed to have had that time with him. He was incredible. He really was.
How good was that? Thanks so much to Di for giving up her time and sharing with us her amazing memories of working with Dead or Alive. What a journey she had with them. Fascinating to hear. My thanks also to Dean Bright for joining us. In our Christmas episode next time, I'm going to be joined once again by Les Sharma. The lovely Lynn Burns is back to chat about the original sleeve artwork and Pete's working relationship with the late, great Andy Airfix, its designer. Also, we're going to be joined by a brand new guest to the pod, Pat Geary, who is friend to the band throughout the Nukleopatra era and has lots of stories to share about his time with Pete and Steve. Santa will also be bringing us a surprise guest next time, so do join us for that. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to hear the bonus content, head over to barrystonemusic.co.uk where you can sign up to access Nukleopatra's tune. Already we've heard some great stories from our guests that didn't make the main episode. And if you want to know why Pete and Steve decided to call me the Viking, well, Nukleopatra's tomb is where you'll find out. Thanks to Demon Music Group for allowing me to include all the music you've heard today. If you haven't already got your copy of Nukleopatra, head over to demonmusicgroup.co.uk and get your copy now. I'll see you for more Nukleopatra adventures in the Christmas episode. Until then, bye for now.